I'm Rebecca Martinez, 42. And after 16 years of building Peterson Associates from a struggling firm into a $340 million powerhouse, my boss handed me a cardboard box and told me to clear out my office. His wife needed my position, he said, smiling like he was doing me a favor. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, but what he didn't know was that I held the keys to everything he'd built on my back. In 3 clicks, I would make a decision that would change both our lives forever. If you've ever felt invisible after years of loyalty, like and subscribe for a story about the moment silence becomes the most powerful weapon of all. The cardboard box sat on my desk like a tombstone, but my mind drifted back to 2008, a different world, a different Rebecca. I was 36 then, freshly divorced and desperate for a fresh start. Peterson Associates occupied a cramped suite above a dry cleaner with peeling wallpaper and mismatched furniture that screamed struggling law firm. James Peterson had interviewed me in his cluttered office, papers stacked everywhere like literary mountains. He was younger then, too, hungry and humble, wearing a suit that had seen better days. "I need someone who can organize chaos," he'd said, gesturing at the disaster around us. "Someone who can build systems that actually work." I'd pulled out my original employment contract from my purse that morning, a crumpled document I'd kept all these years like a talisman. Reading it now, the promises seemed almost naive. Data management specialist, it read, with responsibilities that included developing comprehensive client tracking systems and establishing operational protocols. The salary was modest, but James had sweetened the deal with something more valuable than money. "Trust, Rebecca," he'd said during that first interview, leaning forward with desperate sincerity. "I know we can't pay much now, but if you help me build this thing, you'll have a piece of something real. A partnership." Partnership. The word tasted bitter now. Those early months were a blur of 18-hour days and weekend warrior sessions. The client database was a nightmare, scattered across different software programs with contact information stored in everything from Excel spreadsheets to handwritten notebooks. Some files existed only in James's memory, which was notoriously unreliable when it came to details. I'd started from scratch, building a centralized system that could track not just contact information, but case histories, billing records, communication logs, and relationship maps. It wasn't glamorous work data entry, phone calls to verify information. Countless hours of digital archaeology as I reconstructed years of business relationships from fragments. But I could see the vision. Every client wasn't just a name in a database. They were nodes in a network, connected by industry relationships, referral patterns, and trust. I created algorithms to identify which clients were most likely to provide referrals, which cases generated the highest revenue per hour, and which relationships needed nurturing to prevent defection to competitors. James would find me at my desk at midnight, surrounded by printouts and sticky notes, building what would become the foundation of his empire. "You're going to work yourself to death," he'd say, but he never told me to stop. He understood, even then, that something special was taking shape. The breakthrough came in year 2. When my system identified a pattern, James had missed 3 separate clients who all worked for subsidiaries of the same parent company. I'd mapped their corporate relationships and realized we had an opening for a massive class action case. That single insight generated $2.3 million in revenue and put Peterson and Associates on the map. "This is it, Rebecca," James had said, waving the settlement check like a victory flag. "This is what partnership looks like." But partnerships require trust, and trust requires documentation. I should have insisted on equity agreements then, when my value was undeniable and James was still grateful. Instead, I'd accepted his promises and a modest raise, believing that loyalty would be rewarded with loyalty. How naive I'd been. The first $1 million contract arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2011, delivered by courier in a manila envelope that would change everything. I still kept a copy of that contract in my desk drawer, Meridian Industries' signature sprawled across the bottom line like a promise of prosperity. What James never understood, what he conveniently forgot in later years, was that Meridian found us because of my database, not his charm. My client relationship mapping had identified a connection 3 layers deep. Our client, Margaret Walsh, had a brother-in-law who played golf with Meridian's general counsel. I deflagged this relationship in my system, scheduled strategic follow-ups, and orchestrated a casual introduction at the country club. "Rebecca, you're a genius," James had said, holding the signed contract like it was made of gold. "How did you even think to make that connection?" I'd spent weeks analyzing social media profiles, corporate directories, and alumni databases to map the relationship web. While James saw clients as isolated entities, I saw an interconnected ecosystem where every relationship was a potential bridge to new business. My algorithms didn't just track who we knew, they predicted who we could know and through whom. The Meridian contract was the first domino. Within 6 months, my referral tracking system had generated 3 more 7-figure clients. Each success fed back into the database, creating more sophisticated relationship maps and predictive models. I wasn't just managing data anymore. I was architecting the future of the firm. Peterson Associates moved to the 20th floor of the Carlisle building that winter. Glass offices, marble floors, and a reception area that screamed success. James hired an interior designer who filled our new space with abstract art and Italian leather furniture. "We need to look the part," he'd explained. But I knew the real transformation was happening in my servers and spreadsheets. My client acquisition strategies became increasingly sophisticated. I developed lead scoring algorithms that ranked prospects by conversion probability, created automated nurturing sequences that maintained relationships without constant manual intervention, and built predictive models that could identify which existing clients were at risk of defection before they knew it themselves. The database became our competitive advantage, our secret weapon, our golden goose. Other firms had lawyers, we had intelligence. While competitors made cold calls and relied on networking events, we knew exactly whom to call, when to call them, and what they needed to hear. By 2013, Peterson Associates was generating $50 million annually. By 2015, we'd crossed $100 million. Each milestone was celebrated with champagne and bonuses. But I noticed something changing in James's speeches. The we became I. My innovations became strategic initiatives. My database became our proprietary system. Peterson Associates has built something revolutionary, he'd tell prospective clients, never mentioning that the architect of that revolution was sitting quietly in the background, still cataloging relationships and optimizing algorithms. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd created a system so effective at making connections that it had disconnected me from credit for my own work. Every success story became James's vision. Every breakthrough became his leadership. Every innovation became his strategic thinking. But the database remembered everything, even when people chose to forget. The wedding invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, the kind of elegant stationery that whispered money and status. "James Peterson and Diana Whitmore request the pleasure of your company," it read, followed by details about a ceremony at the Ritz-Carlton that would cost more than most people's annual salary. I should have seen it coming. James had been different since meeting Diana at a legal conference 6 months earlier, distracted during meetings, taking longer lunches, and suddenly interested in conversations about work-life balance that had never concerned him before. Diana was beautiful in that polished, ambitious way that came from good breeding and better connections. MBA from Wharton, family money, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to build anything from scratch. "She's brilliant." James had gushed after their third date, as if intelligence was a rare commodity he'd just discovered. "She has incredible insights about business strategy." What struck me wasn't Diana's credentials. They were impressive, but the way James's tone changed when he talked about her. There was a deference there, a need to prove himself worthy of her attention. It reminded me of how he'd spoken about major clients in the early days, when landing them felt impossible. The wedding was beautiful, I had to admit. Diana glided down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my car, and James looked happier than I'd seen him in years. During the reception, I found myself studying the guest lista, who's who of corporate executives. politicians, and old money families. Diana's network was impressive, the kind built over generations rather than earned through late nights and strategic algorithms. Isn't she perfect? James asked during the father-daughter dance, his eyes following Diana as she laughed with her. New in-laws? She's going to bring so much to the firm. That phrase, bring to the firm, lodged in my chest like a splinter. I brought plenty to the firm over the years, but it had never been discussed in such transactional terms. My contributions had been expected, assumed, taken for granted. Diana's potential contributions were already being celebrated before they existed. The honeymoon lasted 3 weeks in Europe. When they returned, Diana started appearing at the office more frequently, getting to know the business. She'd explain with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd hover during client calls, ask probing questions about our processes, and take detailed notes in a leather portfolio that looked more expensive than my monthly rent. Diana's really impressed with your database system, James mentioned one afternoon as if seeking my approval. She thinks there might be opportunities for optimization. I'd been optimizing that system for 8 years. Every algorithm had been refined through trial and error. Every process streamlined through experience. But Diana saw inefficiencies where I saw carefully calibrated complexity, redundancies where I saw necessary safeguards. She's suggesting we might want to document everything more formally. James continued, in case we ever need to scale the operation or bring in additional resources. Documentation, scaling, additional resources, the corporate buzzwords felt like warning bells. Each one suggesting that my institutional knowledge was being evaluated as a potential liability rather than an asset. I started keeping more detailed records after that conversation, documenting not just what I did, but why I did it. Every decision, every relationship, every algorithm became part of a comprehensive record that only I fully understood. If they wanted documentation, I'd give them documentation, but I'd control what it revealed. Diana's MBA diploma hung in a gold frame behind James's desk within a month of their return from honeymoon. Wharton School of Business, summa cum laude, with a concentration in strategic management and operations. I'd catch James glancing at it during meetings, as if the piece of paper validated decisions I'd been making successfully for years. Rebecca, I'd love to understand your methodology better, Diana said one morning, settling into the chair across from my desk with her ever-present leather portfolio. She wore a crisp white blazer that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and her smile had that practiced quality of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted through charm. What specifically would you like to know? I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the irritation building in my chest. Well, your client relationship mapping is fascinating, but I'm curious about your data validation processes. How do you ensure accuracy across such a complex system? Was a good question, the kind that someone with an MBA would ask, but it also revealed that she'd been studying my work more carefully than I'd realized. I use multiple verification points, I explained, cross-referencing public records, social media profiles, corporate directories, and direct confirmation when possible. Diana made notes in her portfolio, her pen moving quickly across expensive paper. That sounds quite time-intensive. Have you considered automating some of those processes? There are some excellent AI-driven verification tools available now. I'd researched those tools extensively. They were impressive but lacked the nuanced understanding that came from human intuition and experience. Automation works for basic data points, I said carefully, but relationship mapping requires context that algorithms can't always capture. Interesting perspective, Diana said, though her tone suggested disagreement rather than curiosity. In my experience, human bias can actually impede optimal decision-making. Sometimes we're too close to our own systems to see inefficiencies. Criticism stung because it was wrapped in academic language and delivered with a smile. Diana wasn't attacking my work directly. She was questioning my judgment, my methods, my fundamental approach to the job I'd been doing successfully for years. Rebecca's system has generated over $200 million in new business. James interjected from his office doorway, but his defense felt half-hearted. Though I think Diana raises some valid points about scalability. Scalability. There was that word. Again, like a recurring nightmare in corporate clothing. Oh, absolutely. Diana agreed, turning to face her husband. Rebecca's built something remarkable. I'm just thinking about how we can take it to the next level. What if we could replicate this success across multiple markets or license the methodology to other firms? My methodology, my algorithms, my relationships, all discussed as if they were company assets to be monetized rather than the product of my individual expertise and dedication. That's an intriguing idea, James said, and I could see the dollar signs lighting up in his eyes. Rebecca, what would it take to systematize your processes for broader implementation? The question revealed how little he understood about what I actually did. My success wasn't just about systems and processes, it was about intuition, experience, and personal relationships that had taken years to build. You couldn't systematize the way I could read a room, predict a client's needs, or navigate complex family dynamics within corporate hierarchies. Some elements could be systematized, I said carefully, but the relationship aspect is inherently personal. Clients trust individuals, not systems. Diana's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, that's exactly the limitation we'd want. To address building dependencies on individual employees creates vulnerabilities for the organization. Individual employees, as if I were an easily replaceable cog rather than the architect of their success. The quarterly client retention report landed on my desk like a vindication wrapped in statistics. 97% retention rate, with client satisfaction scores averaging 4.8 out of 5. But the real story was in the comments section, where clients repeatedly mentioned my name specifically. Rebecca Martinez understands our business better than we do, wrote Thomas Chen, CEO of Blackstone Manufacturing. She anticipates our needs before we know we have them. Working with Rebecca feels like having a trusted advisor rather than just a service provider, noted Patricia Williams from Coastal Development Group. She's irreplaceable. Irreplaceable. The word felt like armor against Diana's increasing suggestions for optimization and systematization. But Diana had been busy conducting her own research. I discovered this when James called me into his office for what he termed a strategic discussion. Diana sat beside him, her portfolio open to a page filled with color-coded charts and bullet points. Rebecca, we need to talk about client dependency issues, James began, his tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news they'd rehearsed. What kind of dependency issues? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Diana leaned forward, her expression serious. We've analyzed the client relationship patterns, and there's a concerning concentration of personal loyalty around you specifically. While that's testament to your excellent work, it creates operational risks. She slid a printed report across the desk. My name appeared highlighted in yellow on nearly every page: client communications, relationship maps, satisfaction surveys. It looked damning when presented this way, as if my success was actually a problem to be solved. 68% of our major clients list you as their primary contact preference, Diana continued. That's an unsustainable concentration of relationship capital in a single employee. Not partner, not colleague, not the architect of their success. Employee. Those relationships were built over years, I said, keeping my voice steady. Despite the anger building in my chest, they're based on trust, expertise, and consistent performance. Absolutely, James agreed quickly. And that's exactly why we need to figure out how to expand that success. Diana's been developing a plan to distribute client relationships more evenly across the team. What kind of plan? I asked, though I was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. Diana's smile was practiced and professional. Cross-training initiatives, relationship mapping workshops, structured client transition protocols. The goal is to make sure our client success isn't dependent on any single point of failure. As if 16 years of dedication and relationship building was a vulnerability rather than an asset. Rebecca, James said, his tone taking on that false warmth he used when delivering difficult news. We'd like you to lead this initiative. Who better to teach relationship management than our most successful relationship manager? The proposal was elegant in its manipulation. Frame my eventual replacement as a promotion. my marginalization as leadership development, my loss of control as an opportunity to mentor others. I appreciate the confidence, I said carefully, but I'm not sure this approach addresses the real issue. Client relationships aren't transferable commodities. They're built on personal trust and individual expertise. That's exactly the mindset we need to evolve beyond, Diana replied smoothly. In modern business, sustainable success requires systematized excellence rather than individual heroics. Individual heroics. 16 years of building their empire reduced to a character flaw that needed correction. The private meeting happened on a Friday afternoon when most of the staff had left early for the weekend. James had asked me to stay behind for what he called a crucial conversation about your future here. The phrasing should have been a warning, but I was still naive enough to hope it meant recognition rather than reckoning. I'd brought my notebook, a habit from years of documenting important discussions. Those handwritten notes would become crucial evidence of what transpired in his office that day, though I didn't know it at the time. Rebecca, I'm going to be direct, James began, settling behind his mahogany desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. Diana and I have been discussing the structural changes we need to implement, and we've reached some difficult decisions. The royal we wasn't lost on me. When had Diana become an equal partner in decisions about my career? We need you to transition your primary client relationships to Diana over the next 60 days. He continued, consulting notes that I suspected Diana had prepared. She'll be taking over strategic client management while you focus on system documentation and knowledge transfer. 60 days. 16 years of relationship building compressed into 2 months of forced handovers. James, those relationships can't be transferred like files in a cabinet, I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite the shock. Clients trust me personally. They've invested years in building confidence in my judgment and expertise, which is exactly why you're the perfect person to facilitate their transition to Diana. He replied, as if the logic was unassailable. Your endorsement will carry tremendous weight. My endorsement of my own replacement. The audacity was breathtaking. What about my role after the transition? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. James exchanged a glance with Diana, who had been sitting silently throughout the conversation like a witness to an execution. We're restructuring your position to focus on back-end operations and system maintenance. Still crucial work, but more sustainable from a business continuity perspective. Back-end operations, system maintenance. They were demoting me to a glorified IT technician maintaining the empire I'd built while Diana claimed credit for its continued success. And if I refuse, the question escaped before I could stop myself. James's expression hardened. Rebecca, I hope it doesn't come to that. You're valuable to this organization, but the business has evolved beyond its early dependence on individual contributors. We need team players who can embrace change and support collective success. Individual contributors, team players. The corporate jargon was a thin veneer over a simple truth: conform or leave. I need time to consider this, I said, though my mind was already racing toward darker possibilities. Of course, James replied, but his tone suggested my consideration was a formality rather than a genuine choice. We'll need your decision by Monday. And Rebecca. He paused, ensuring he had my full attention. I want you to know this isn't personal. It's just business evolution, not personal. As if 16 years of my life could be dismissed as an impersonal business decision. I left his office that evening with my notebook clutched in my hands, pages filled with quotes and decisions that would prove prophetic. Diana's ambitious timeline, James's casual dismissal of my concerns, the systematic dismantling of everything I'd built, all documented in my careful handwriting. They wanted documentation. They were about to get more than they'd bargained for. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. Audited my own power. Sitting in my home office with 3 monitors glowing and coffee growing cold, I systematically cataloged every system access, every administrative privilege, every piece of institutional knowledge that lived exclusively in my head. And my databases the system access logs painted a picture that even I hadn't fully appreciated. My credentials touched every aspect of Peterson and Associates operations, client databases, financial systems, communication platforms, backup servers, and the proprietary algorithms that drove our competitive advantage. I wasn't just an employee with database access, was the database. I was the system my administrator privileges had grown organically over 16 years, granted piece by piece as needs arose and trust accumulated. James had never questioned my requests for expanded access because my judgment had proven reliable. Why wouldn't the person who built the system have full control over it? But now, studying the access logs with fresh eyes, I realized something profound. James and Diana didn't understand the technical infrastructure of their own success. They knew the database generated leads and tracked relationships, but they had no idea how it worked, what maintained it, or most critically, what could destroy it. I opened a secure notepad and began documenting the scope of my access master. Database administrator writes across all client systems. Check.root. Access to backup servers and data recovery protocols. Check. Exclusive control over the relationship mapping algorithms that powered our lead generation. Check. Administrative. Privileges for email systems, communication logs, and document management platforms. Check. The only copies of certain proprietary code and system documentation. Check. It was like discovering it's been sitting on a nuclear arsenal without realizing it. Every system they depended on, every process that generated revenue, every competitive advantage they possessed, all of it flowed through infrastructure I controlled completely. More importantly, began to understand what they didn't know. James had never bothered to learn the technical details of database management. Diana, for all her MBA credentials, had no background in information systems or data architecture. They saw the outputs, reports, leads, client intelligence, but they were blind to the inputs and processes that created those outputs. I spent Saturday morning analyzing our client contracts, looking for patterns and dependencies they might not have considered. What I found was sobering. 47 major clients had contract clauses that specifically mentioned me by name as the primary point of contact. 18 others had informal agreements that assumed my continued involvement. The personal relationships weren't just valuable, they were legally embedded in our business obligations. Sunday afternoon, I created something I'd never needed before. A comprehensive map of every critical system, password, backup location, and recovery protocol. Not for training purposes or knowledge transfer, but for strategic understanding. If this was war, I needed to know where the battlefields were and what weapons were available. The most chilling discovery came last. I was the only person who knew where certain backup systems were located, how they functioned, or how to restore operations if something went wrong. In building a system so sophisticated and secure, I'd inadvertently created something that couldn't function without me. They wanted to make me obsolete. It never realized I was already indispensable, not because of my relationships or expertise, but because of the technical infrastructure I'd created and controlled for the first time since Friday's meeting. I smiled. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I dressed carefully, my best navy suit, the one that made me feel powerful and professional. If this was to be my last day as Rebecca Martinez, strategic architect of Peterson and Associates, I wanted to look the part. James called me into his office at 9:15 a.m. Diana was already there, sitting in what used to be the guest chair but now felt like her permanent throne. On James's desk sat a manila folder that I knew contained my termination letter, the official document that would reduce 16 years of my life to corporate boilerplate. "Rebecca, I hope you've had time to consider our conversation." James began, but his tone suggested he wasn't expecting negotiation. "I have," I replied, settling into the chair across from him. "And I have some concerns about the timeline and transition plan." Diana leaned forward slightly, her expression patient but firm. "We understand this is a significant change, but 60 days is actually quite generous for this type of restructuring." Generous. As if they were doing me a favor by destroying my career slowly rather than quickly. "The client relationships can't be transferred that quickly," I insisted. "Thomas Chen from Blackstone specifically requested that I handle their merger consultation. Patricia Williams has a board presentation next month that we've been preparing for 6 weeks. Which is exactly why Diana needs to be brought up to speed immediately, James replied. She can handle those obligations just as effectively. Just as effectively. 16 years of expertise dismissed as easily replaceable. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder of my own. I prepared a detailed analysis of the potential risks and complications with this transition plan. If you'd like to review it before making a final decision, James exchanged a glance with Diana, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Rebecca, I appreciate your thoroughness, but we've made our decision. The new structure is effective immediately. He slid the manila folder across his desk. Inside, I knew, was my termination letter carefully worded to avoid legal liability. While stripping away my career, my relationships, and my future with the company I'd built. We're offering a generous severance package, Diana added smoothly. 6 months salary, continuation of benefits, and positive references for future employment. 6 months salary in exchange for 16 years of my life. Positive references for the work they were about to claim as their own. There's a cardboard box by your desk, James said, unable to meet my eyes. Security will escort you out once you've collected your personal belongings. We think it's best to make this transition as clean as possible. A cardboard box, the universal symbol of professional exile, waiting beside the desk where I'd built an empire. The same desk where I'd worked those 18-hour days, where I'd solved problems they didn't even know existed, where I'd created the foundation of their success. I stood slowly, the termination letter heavy in my hands. This is a mistake, James. You don't understand what you're destroying, Rebecca, he said, and for a moment his voice carried a hint of the gratitude I remembered from the early days. You've been incredible, but businesses evolve. People evolve. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. The greater good. Their greater good built on the destruction of mine. I walked to my desk in a daze, conscious of colleagues averting their eyes and conversations stopping mid-sentence. The cardboard box sat there like a tombstone, waiting to hold the remnants of my professional life. But as I began packing my personal items, photos, coffee mug, the small plant I'd kept alive for 7 years, I realized something that James and Diana had failed to consider. They could fire me, but they couldn't fire my access to their systems. Not immediately. The security guard was professional, but firm. No personal calls, no lingering goodbyes, no final emails. But he made one crucial mistake. He assumed I needed to be at my physical desk to access the systems I'd built. He didn't understand that. I designed remote access protocols years ago, that my laptop contained cached credentials, that the database lived in the cloud where geographical location was irrelevant. I drove home in silence, the cardboard box sliding across my back seat. With every turn, my neighbor waved from her garden, probably wondering why I was home at 10:30 on a Monday morning. I waved back, maintaining the facade of normalcy while my world imploded in slow motion. Inside my house, I set the box on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment. 16 years reduced to a coffee mug, 3 framed photos, and a half-dead succulent. The termination letter lay on top like a death certificate. But they'd forgotten something crucial. The database schema. The master blueprint of their entire operation existed in my personal files backed up on drives they'd never thought to inventory. Every table structure, every relationship mapping, every algorithm and process, all documented in technical specifications that only I truly understood. I opened my laptop and logged into the system remotely. My credentials still worked. In their haste to humiliate me with the cardboard box ceremony, they'd forgotten the most basic principle of information security. Revoke access immediately upon termination. The Peterson Associates database sprawled across my screen like a digital empire. Client records, contact information, relationship maps, financial data, communication logs, proprietary algorithms, everything that made them successful. Everything that generated their $340 million in annual revenue. My cursor hovered over the administration panel. 3 clicks would delete everything. 3 clicks would reduce their empire to empty servers and broken promises. But I hesitated. This wasn't just about James and Diana anymore. There were innocent employees who depended on this company for their livelihoods. Administrative assistants, junior associates, support staff who had nothing to do with my termination but would suffer the consequences of my revenge. I thought about Thomas Chen from Blackstone Manufacturing, who trusted me with his company's most sensitive legal matters. About Patricia Williams from Coastal Development, who called me her secret weapon in board meetings. About dozens of other clients who valued our relationship and would be devastated by the chaos that would follow. Then, I thought about the cardboard box, about Diana's condescending smile, about James's casual dismissal of 16 years of loyalty, about the systematic erasure of my contributions and the theft of my legacy. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Diana. I'll need your system passwords by end of business today for the transition. Thanks." The casual tone, the exclamation point, the assumption that I would simply comply with my own erasure crystallized everything I'd been feeling into pure, focused rage. I opened the database administration console and navigated to the backup configuration settings. Their disaster recovery plan assumed that backups were always available, that data could always be restored, that someone with my knowledge would always be there to fix what went wrong. They were about to learn how wrong those assumptions were. My hands moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, executing commands I'd memorized years ago but never thought I'd use maliciously. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using my own expertise to destroy my own creation. 3 clicks. All it would take. The first click deleted the client contact database, 340,000 entries representing 16 years of relationship building, reduced to empty tables in milliseconds. Names, phone numbers, email addresses, corporate hierarchies, personal preferences. Communication history's all gone. I watched the progress bar sweep across my screen with a mixture of satisfaction and horror. Each percentage point represented millions of dollars in business intelligence, years of carefully cultivated relationships, countless hours of research and verification. The database that had powered Peterson Associates' meteoric rise was disappearing line by line. The second click targeted the financial integration systems, client billing histories, payment processing records, accounts receivable tracking, revenue projections. The entire financial backbone of the operation evaporated. Without this data, they wouldn't know who owed them money, who had paid, or which clients were profitable. But the real devastation came with the third click, the relationship mapping algorithms. This was my masterpiece, the secret sauce that had given Peterson Associates its competitive edge, the code that identified potential clients through 6 degrees of separation, that predicted which relationships would yield referrals, that turned social connections into business opportunities. I'd kept backup drives of the most critical systems in a fireproof, best safe-at-home drives that contained the only remaining copies of certain proprietary code and documentation. As the deletion commands executed on the main servers, I methodically located each backup drive and fed them into my personal shredder, the industrial-grade shredder I'd bought for disposing of old client documents. Now served a different purpose. Drive after drive disappeared into its mechanical teeth, taking with them the accumulated knowledge of nearly 2 decades. The sound was oddly satisfying, a mechanical drumbeat, accompanying the digital destruction happening on my laptop screen. My phone rang. James's number appeared on the caller ID, but I let it go to voicemail. Then Diana called, then James again, then numbers I didn't recognize probably. IT staff discovering that critical systems were failing across the network. I opened my email, client, and composed a simple message to the general company address. Effective immediately. I am no longer able to provide technical support for the database systems at Peterson Associates. All documentation and backup materials have been permanently removed from company premises. Best wishes for your future endeavors. Rebecca Martinez, send. The beauty of my approach was its surgical precision. I hadn't touched payroll systems or basic operational software. The administrative staff would still get paid. The lights would stay on, the phones would work. But every system that generated revenue, every database that contained client intelligence, Every algorithm that provided competitive advantage God, Peterson and Associates could continue to exist as a legal entity, but they could no longer function. As a business, they had office space, furniture, and employees, but no way to contact clients, no record of ongoing cases, no means of generating new business. I thought about Diana's confident assertion that human expertise could be replaced by systematic processes. She was about to discover what happened when you systematically deleted the processes. My laptop chimed with a new email notification. The subject line read, "Urgent system failure, immediate assistance required." The sender was James, and the timestamp showed it had been sent 12 minutes ago. I closed the laptop without reading it. They'd wanted to eliminate their dependence on me. Mission accomplished. I woke up Tuesday morning to 17 missed calls and 43 unread text messages. My phone had been buzzing through the night like an angry hornet, but I'd turned off the ringer and slept peacefully for the first time in months. The morning. Sun streamed through my bedroom windows as I made coffee with deliberate slowness, savoring the ritual of normalcy while chaos erupted in a glass tower across town. I'd always been an early riser, but today felt different, hurried, purposeful. Free from the anxiety that had plagued me since Diana's arrival. My voicemail was full. I played the messages while buttering toast, listening to James's voice evolve. From confusion to panic to barely controlled rage. Message 1. Timestamped 11:47 a.m. yesterday. Rebecca, we're having some technical difficulties with the database. Could you give me a call when you get this? Message 5, 2:23 p.m. Rebecca, this is urgent. Multiple systems are down and we need your immediate assistance. Please call me back right away. Message 9, 4:18 p.m. Rebecca, I don't know what's happening, but we need to talk. Whatever this is, we can work it out. Message 15, 8:31 p.m. Rebecca, if you don't return my calls immediately, I'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. This is criminal behavior. Criminal behavior. The phrase made me smile. I'd used my own administrative credentials to access systems I'd built, to delete data I'd created, using processes I'd designed. Everything I'd done was technically within the scope of my access permissions they'd forgotten to revoke. I checked the news websites while eating breakfast, half expecting to see headlines about Peterson and Associates' mysterious system failure. But corporate disasters rarely made immediate news unless they involved public safety or celebrity scandals. This would simmer privately for now, contained within the business community until the full scope became clear. My personal email contained messages from former colleagues, carefully worded inquiries about my departure, and offers to connect over coffee. The corporate gossip network was already spinning theories about my sudden exit, but they didn't know the real story yet. Diana had sent 3 increasingly frantic emails demanding system passwords and technical documentation. Her tone shifted, from professional courtesy in the first message to barely concealed desperation in the third. The MBA confidence was cracking under pressure she'd never anticipated. At 9:15 a.m., exactly 24 hours after my termination meeting, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, saw a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase, probably a process server or attorney sent to intimidate me into cooperation. I didn't answer. Instead, I made a second cup of coffee and settled into my home office to monitor the situation remotely. The Peterson and Associates website was still functioning, but their client portal displayed error messages. Their automated email systems were sending bounce notifications. The phone system worked, but without access to client databases. Receptionists couldn't transfer calls or access account information. I imagined Diana sitting at my old desk, staring at blank screens and realizing that her MBA hadn't prepared her for this scenario. All her theories about systematization and process optimization were useless when the processes no longer existed. My phone rang again, James's number, for the 18th time. This time, I answered, "Hello, James. Rebecca. Thank God. We need to talk immediately. There's been some kind of system malfunction." "No malfunction," I interrupted calmly. "Everything is working exactly as intended." The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds before he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" The emergency board meeting convened at 2 p.m. on Wednesday in the 20th floor conference room where I'd once presented quarterly reports with pride. I wasn't there, of course, but I knew exactly how these meetings unfolded and helped design their crisis management protocols years ago. The meeting minutes arrived in my email by Thursday morning, forwarded by a sympathetic colleague who thought I should know what was being said about my resignation. The official record was sanitized corporate speak, but between the lines lay a story of complete operational collapse. Agenda Item 3. Assessment of Data Infrastructure Failure. The minutes read, CEO Peterson reported that critical client management systems experienced comprehensive failure beginning Monday, resulting in loss of primary databases, communication logs, and proprietary analytics platforms. Comprehensive failure. As if my surgical deletion was some kind of natural disaster rather than deliberate action. The scope of data loss includes 340,000 plus client contact records, 16 years of relationship mapping data, financial integration systems, and proprietary lead generation algorithms. Estimated replacement costs $340 million in lost business intelligence and system reconstruction. $340 million. The number felt abstract until I considered what it represented: every relationship I'd mapped, every algorithm I'd refined, every competitive advantage I'd created. 16 years of my professional life quantified in corporate accounting terms. Board member Williams inquired about backup recovery options. CEO Peterson reported that standard backup protocols appear to have been compromised, with primary backup systems showing similar data corruption patterns. Data corruption. They still didn't understand that this wasn't a technical failure, was intentional destruction. Diana's MBA theories about systematization had collided with the reality that some systems can't be recreated without their original architect. Board member Thompson raised concerns about legal liability given the timing of the data loss relative to recent personnel changes. Legal counsel advised that preliminary investigation suggests no criminal activity, as terminated employee maintained legitimate system access at time of incident. No criminal activity. My actions had been legal, if devastating. I'd used my own credentials to delete my own work using systems I'd built and maintained. The fact that they'd failed to revoke my access immediately upon termination was their oversight, not my crime. New Interim Chief Technology Officer Diana Peterson presented a preliminary recovery plan with estimated timeline of 18 to 24 months for full system reconstruction, assuming availability of external consulting resources and complete client relationship rebuilding. Diana Peterson. She'd already changed her title and added her married name to the organizational chart. The woman who'd systematically undermined my work was now officially in charge of recreating it, too. Years to rebuild what I'd constructed over 16. And that assumed they could find consultants willing to work on such a massive reconstruction project, clients willing to wait for restored service, and partners willing to invest in a company that had lost its entire competitive advantage overnight. Board unanimously approved emergency funding of $2.3 million for immediate system recovery efforts and client retention initiatives. Emergency funding. They were hemorrhaging money on recovery efforts while clients fled to competitors who could actually serve them. The irony was exquisite. They'd fired me to save money and were now spending millions trying to replace me. The final entry in the minutes was the most telling. Meeting adjourned at 4:47 p.m. due to urgent client calls requiring immediate attention. They couldn't even finish their own emergency meeting because the crisis was consuming their ability to function normally. Every minute spent in conference rooms was time not spent trying to salvage relationships I'd built and they'd destroyed through their own arrogance. My phone buzzed with a text from my former assistant. They're asking everyone to work weekends trying to recreate client lists from memory and old emails. It's chaos here. It's chaos. The natural result of systematic destruction meeting systematic incompetence. The legal demand letter arrived by certified mail on Friday morning, delivered by a postal worker who seemed apologetic about requiring my signature for what was clearly bad news. The envelope bore the letterhead of Hartwell, Morrison, and Associates, Most expensive litigation firm in the city. I opened it over my morning coffee, reading the legal threats with the same calm I'd felt all week. The letter was 3 pages of carefully crafted intimidation designed to frighten me into immediate compliance with their demands. Our client Peterson Associates has suffered catastrophic damages as a direct result of your deliberate destruction of proprietary business systems. The letter began. This constitutes criminal sabotage, theft of trade secrets, and breach of fiduciary duty. Criminal sabotage. They were painting my actions as terrorism rather than the legitimate use of administrative access they'd failed to revoke. The legal posturing was impressive, but ultimately hollow. They had no criminal case because I'd broken no laws. Immediate demands: 1 full restoration of all deleted data and systems. Its provision of all backup materials and documentation. 3. Cooperation with forensic investigation of damaged systems. 4. Cessation of any further interference with client relationships. Their demands revealed how little they understood about data recovery. You can't restore what no longer exists. Can't provide backups that have been destroyed. Can't cooperate with investigations into legal actions. They were demanding the impossible while threatening consequences they couldn't deliver. I called my attorney Margaret Chen, a sharp litigator I'd met through networking events over the years. She'd always impressed me with her practical approach to complex legal problems. "Rebecca, I've been expecting your call," Margaret said when her assistant put me through. "Word travels fast in our community, and what happened to Peterson and Associates is already legal gossip. What kind of exposure am I looking at?" I asked, cutting straight to the heart of my concerns. "Honestly, less than they want you to believe. You used legitimate system access to delete data you created. Their failure to revoke your credentials immediately upon termination is their liability, not yours. This reads like corporate intimidation rather than serious legal threat." The relief was immediate and profound. I'd acted in anger, but I hadn't acted illegally. "They're claiming trade secret theft," I continued, "for deleting your own work. That's laughable. Trade secrets require someone taking proprietary information for competitive advantage. You destroyed information rather than stealing it, and you gained no commercial benefit. Their legal theory is fundamentally flawed." Margaret paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Rebecca, I have to ask, do you have any documentation of the circumstances surrounding your termination? Employment agreements, meeting notes, communications about your role changes?" I thought about my notebook filled with detailed records of every conversation, every broken promise, every systematic attempt to marginalize my contributions. "I have extensive documentation," Ed, "because I suspect Peterson's legal strategy is based on the assumption that you'll panic and comply rather than fight. They're probably not prepared for someone who documented their actions and understands their vulnerabilities." That afternoon, Margaret sent my response to their legal demand, a 2-page letter that was a masterpiece of professional dismissal. The key paragraph made me smile. "Ms. Martinez used legitimate administrative credentials to access systems she designed and built over 16 years of employment. Your client's failure to revoke these credentials immediately upon termination represents a fundamental security oversight on their part, not criminal activity on hers. Furthermore, your characterization of data deletion as theft is legally incoherent, as one cannot steal something by destroying it." The letter concluded with our own demand: cease all harassment of our client or face potential legal action for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. By evening, I had 3 voicemails from James, no longer threatening, but pleading. His tone had shifted from anger to desperation as the reality of their situation became clear. "Rebecca, please, we can work this out. Name your terms. Name my terms." As if 16 years of loyalty and expertise were negotiable commodities that could be purchased back with the right offer. Some things, once destroyed, could never be rebuilt. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The client termination notices began arriving the following week like a steady drumbeat of corporate death. Each formal letter represented years of relationship building reduced to legal boilerplate. But they also validated everything I'd known. about the personal nature of business relationships. Thomas Chen from Blackstone Manufacturing was the first to formally withdraw. His termination notice was brief but pointed, due to recent service disruptions and inability to access critical account information. Blackstone Manufacturing is terminating its relationship with Peterson Associates effective immediately. What the formal notice didn't convey was the personal phone call Thomas made to my home number, a call that revealed just how thoroughly James and Diana had misunderstood their own business model. "Rebecca, I heard about what happened," Thomas said, his voice carrying the warmth I'd come to appreciate over 8 years of working together. "I want you to know that Blackstone's issue isn't with you, it's with them. We tried to continue working with the firm, but frankly, no one there understands our business the way you did." The conversation that followed was illuminating. Diana had attempted to handle Blackstone's ongoing merger consultation using generic legal frameworks rather than the nuanced understanding of their corporate culture that I'd developed over years of collaboration. She'd missed critical industry regulations that could have derailed the entire transaction. "She's competent enough," Thomas continued, "but competence isn't the same as partnership. You understood our strategic goals, our risk tolerance, our board dynamics. She sees us as a case file." Patricia Williams from Coastal Development called the next day with a similar story. "Rebecca, they assigned some junior associate to handle our board presentation. It's probably very bright, but he doesn't know our history, our challenges, our relationships with city planning. It would take months to bring him up to speed, and we don't have months." By Thursday, 12 major clients had formally terminated their relationships with Peterson Associates. The pattern was consistent: initial attempts to work with Diana or assign substitutes, followed by frustration over the loss of institutional knowledge, concluding with formal withdrawal and immediate engagement of competitor firms. The most devastating termination came from Meridian Industries, the client whose original Miliando contract had launched Peterson Associates into the big leagues. Their corporate counsel's letter was diplomatically brutal. "While we appreciate the professional service Peterson Associates has provided over the years, recent operational difficulties have compromised our confidence in the firm's ability to maintain the high standards our relationship requires. We are therefore terminating all pending engagements and will not be renewing our annual retainer agreement." Meridian's annual retainer alone was worth $3.2 million. Their decision to leave would ripple through the industry, signaling to other major corporations that Peterson Associates was no longer reliable. Learned about the exodus through a combination of formal notices, forwarded by sympathetic colleagues, and direct outreach from former clients. Many expressed interest in continuing our professional relationship once I'd established new arrangements. Some were surprisingly direct about their intentions. "Rebecca," said David Morrison from Pacific Financial, "I don't care what firm's letterhead is on the documents as long as you're the one handling our work. Let me know where you land and we'll follow." The irony was exquisite. James and Diana had systematically dismantled my role to eliminate client dependency on individual relationships, only to discover that the clients valued those relationships more than the corporate brand. By removing me, they'd triggered the exact outcome they'd tried to prevent: client departure based on personal loyalty. The financial impact was staggering. Industry publications were beginning to report on Peterson Associates' client retention challenges, though the full scope wasn't yet public knowledge. Conservative estimates suggested they'd lost over $40 million in annual billings within 2 weeks. Diana's ambitious reconstruction timeline was already proving optimistic. You can't rebuild trust in 18 months when trust took 16 years to establish. The job offers began arriving within days of the industry gossip mill, confirming my departure from Peterson Associates. The first came from Whitmore & Klein, a boutique firm specializing in corporate acquisitions, followed quickly by approaches from 3 larger practices that had been competing with Peterson for years. But the most intriguing offer came from an unexpected source: Michael Rodriguez, senior partner at Hartwell, Morrison & Associates, the very firm representing Peterson in their legal threats against me. "Rebecca, I hope you'll forgive the awkward circumstances. Michael said during our coffee meeting at a discreet cafe downtown. I want to be completely transparent. My firm is representing Peterson, but I'm approaching you as an individual. Partner interested in your expertise. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. While his colleagues drafted threatening letters, Michael was recruiting me for a senior position that would make me a direct competitor to my former employer. I've been following your work for years, he continued, sliding a formal offer letter across the small table. The client relationship mapping you developed at Peterson was revolutionary. Our corporate clients have been asking why we don't have similar capabilities. I opened the offer letter and felt my breath catch. The salary was 40% higher than what I'd been earning at Peterson, with equity participation, full benefits, and most importantly, a formal partnership track with guaranteed consideration within 18 months. The position would be Senior Director of Client Intelligence, Michael explained. You'd have a team of 5 analysts, full budget authority for technology infrastructure, and direct reporting to the management committee. Essentially, you'd be building the same type of operation you created at Peterson, but with proper recognition and compensation. The offer was tempting, but I hesitated. Michael, won't this create a conflict of interest given your firm's current legal relationship with Peterson? His smile was knowing. Rebecca, I've reviewed the legal claims against you extensively. They're frivolous posturing with no merit. By the time this offer becomes public, I suspect Peterson's legal strategy will have collapsed entirely. He was right, of course. Margaret had already decimated their initial threats, and their position was weakening daily as the scope of their operational failures became apparent. There's something else, Michael continued. Several of your former clients have specifically requested that we pursue this arrangement. Thomas Chen from Blackstone mentioned that he'd consider bringing their business to us if you were part of our team. The validation was overwhelming. Not only had my former clients left Peterson, but they were actively encouraging competitors to hire me. My reputation in the industry had survived the corporate character assassination intact. Over the next week, I received 2 additional offers. Stewart and Associates proposed a consulting arrangement that would let me work with multiple firms while maintaining independence. Pinnacle Legal offered a senior partnership position with immediate equity and a signing bonus that exceeded my annual salary at Peterson. Each offer included testimonials from former Peterson clients who had specifically requested my involvement. The professional network I'd built over 16 years was proving more valuable than the corporate infrastructure I'd destroyed. The most satisfying validation came from an unexpected source, Rebecca Thompson, a junior associate I'd mentored at Peterson 3 years earlier. She'd left to join a startup firm and was now a senior partner herself. Rebecca, I want you to know that everyone in the industry understands what really happened, she said during our lunch meeting. Peterson's reputation is toxic right now. Partners are joking that they fired their entire business model when they let you go. The startup firm she represented, Nexus Legal Solutions, was growing rapidly and needed exactly the kind of systematic client development I'd pioneered. Their offer was the most creative: a founding partnership position with equity, minimal administrative responsibilities, and the freedom to innovate without corporate interference. We're not trying to rebuild Peterson and Associates, Rebecca explained. We want to build something better with you as a true partner from the beginning. For the first time since the cardboard box moment, I felt hopeful about my professional future. The destruction of my old career was revealing opportunities I'd never imagined while trapped in Peterson's increasingly toxic environment. Diana's MBA theories about replaceability were proving spectacularly wrong. In trying to eliminate their dependence on me, James and Diana had demonstrated exactly how irreplaceable I was. The bankruptcy filing appeared in the legal notices section of the morning newspaper 6 weeks after my termination. Peterson and Associates LLP seeks Chapter 11 protection. Read the modest headline that marked the end of an empire I'd helped build and ultimately destroyed. The filing documents, publicly available through the court system, painted a stark picture of financial collapse. Assets: $2.3 million in office equipment and furniture. Liabilities: $47 million in outstanding client obligations, unpaid vendor bills, and emergency loans taken to fund their failed recovery efforts. James had leveraged everything: his house, its investments, even Diana's trust fund, in a desperate attempt to keep the firm operational long enough to rebuild what I'd destroyed. The personal guarantees he'd signed for emergency funding would haunt him for years. Even after the corporate bankruptcy discharged the firm's obligations, I felt no satisfaction reading about his financial ruin, only a hollow recognition that some actions have consequences far beyond their original intent. I'd wanted to hurt James and Diana professionally, but I'd inadvertently destroyed their personal lives as well. The bankruptcy trustees' report revealed details that even I hadn't anticipated. Unable to serve existing clients or generate new business, Peterson Associates had hemorrhaged money while paying consultants to attempt system reconstruction. The emergency funding approved by the board had disappeared within weeks, consumed by hourly rates from data recovery specialists who ultimately concluded that full restoration was impossible. Diana's marriage didn't survive the financial pressure. The divorce filing appeared in public records 3 days after the bankruptcy announcement, citing irreconcilable differences that everyone understood as code for financial devastation. She'd married a successful entrepreneur and found herself tied to a bankrupt defendant in multiple lawsuits. Diana Peterson seeks dissolution of marriage from James Peterson. The court filing read, followed by demands for immediate separation of assets and spousal support. The woman who'd systematically undermined my career was now fleeing the wreckage of her own ambitions. James had tried to contact me 17 times in the weeks leading up to the bankruptcy filing. The voicemails evolved from anger to bargaining to outright pleading as the scope of his situation became clear. "Rebecca, please," his final message said, his voice barely recognizable through exhaustion and stress. "I know I made mistakes. No, we treated you badly. But there are 15 people here who are going to lose their jobs. Whatever you want, partnership, ownership, complete control, it's yours. Just help us salvage something." 15 people. I'd worked alongside most of them for years, shared coffee and birthday celebrations and holiday parties. They'd become collateral damage in a war between me and their leadership, innocent casualties of decisions they'd never been party to. But it was too late for salvage operations. The damage was too comprehensive, the client exodus too complete, the financial hemorrhaging too severe. Even if I'd wanted to help, and I wasn't sure I did, the timeline for recovery exceeded their ability to survive. The law firm that had dominated corporate legal services for over a decade was reduced to liquidating office furniture and settling with creditors for pennies on the dollar. The 20th floor offices, with their marble floors and Italian leather furniture, would house a different business within months. I attended the creditors' meeting as an observer, sitting in the back of a sterile conference room while lawyers divided the corpse of Peterson and Associates. James looked older, diminished, his expensive suits replaced by the kind of off-the-rack clothing that suggested financial constraints. He saw me during a break and approached with the desperate hope of someone drowning in consequences they'd never anticipated. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying none of the authority I remembered. "I'm sorry for all of it. It's the way we treated you, the things we said, the promises we broke. You deserved better." The apology was sincere but useless, 16 years too late, and motivated by desperation rather than genuine recognition of wrongdoing. "No," I replied simply, and walked away. Some forms of justice arrive not through deliberate action, but through the natural consequences of poor decisions. James and Diana had destroyed my career through arrogance and greed, but they destroyed their own through ignorance and overconfidence. The bankruptcy filing was simply the official acknowledgement of what had been inevitable from the moment they handed me that cardboard box. The logo for Martinez Strategic Consulting was elegantly simple, my initials intertwined in a design that suggested both strength and sophistication. After weeks of considering various partnership offers, I'd chosen the path that terrified and excited me most, building something entirely my own. The decision crystallized during a conversation with Thomas Chen, who'd become an informal advisor during my transition period. "Rebecca," he'd said over lunch at his favorite downtown restaurant, "you've spent 16 years building other people's dreams. maybe it's time to build your own. He was right. Every job offer I'd received, however generous, represented another opportunity to enrich someone else's vision while my own ideas remained secondary. I had the expertise, the relationships, and thanks to Diana's systematic documentation of my value, a clear understanding of what my work was worth. Martinez. Strategic Consulting launched on a Monday morning in November, operating from a sophisticated boutique home office I designed to accommodate both virtual meetings and in-person consultations. The overhead was minimal, the flexibility maximum, and the profit potential unlimited. My first client was Blackstone Manufacturing. Thomas had waited patiently for me to establish independent practice, then immediately engaged my services for their next major acquisition. The retainer agreement was twice what Peterson had charged for similar work, and Thomas signed it without hesitation. Quality costs money, he explained, when I questioned the premium pricing. I'm not paying for your time, I'm paying for 16 years of expertise, and the peace of mind that comes with working with the best. Within 3 months, 8 former Peterson clients had transitioned to my independent practice. Patricia Williams from Coastal Development, David Morrison from Pacific Financial, and 6 others who'd specifically requested my continued involvement in their legal matters. Their loyalty wasn't just personally gratifying, it was financially transformative. The business model I developed was everything Peterson Associates should have been: relationship-focused, technology-enhanced, and built around sustainable partnerships rather than extractive transactions. I offered strategic consulting on client development, relationship mapping as a service, and technology solutions for firms looking to modernize their approach to client intelligence. But the most satisfying aspect of my new venture was mentoring. Young lawyers who'd heard about my story reached out for guidance on building your own client relationships and navigating corporate politics. I developed workshops on strategic networking, launched a podcast about authentic relationship building in professional services, and began speaking at industry conferences about the lessons learned from both success and catastrophic failure. The speaking engagement that meant the most was at the annual Legal Innovation Summit, where I delivered a presentation titled Beyond Systematization: Why Human Relationships Can't Be Replaced by Algorithms. The audience included senior partners from major firms, including several who'd attempted to recruit me. The lesson of Peterson and Associates, I told the packed auditorium, isn't that individual contributions are dangerous to organizations. It's that organizations become dangerous when they fail to value the individuals who drive their success. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached with stories of their own experiences with corporate betrayal, systemic undervaluation, and the courage required to rebuild after professional devastation. 6 months after launching Martinez Strategic Consulting, I moved into proper office space, a modest suite that reflected my values rather than my ego. The walls displayed client appreciation letters, industry awards, fan photos from speaking engagements rather than expensive art chosen by interior designers. My assistant, a brilliant recent law school graduate named Maria Santos, helped manage the growing demand for my services. Unlike my experience at Peterson, Maria was treated as a partner in our success rather than a subordinate in my empire. Rebecca, Maria said one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly financials, you realize we're generating more profit per client than Peterson ever did, right? She was correct. Without the overhead of marble floors and expensive furniture, without the burden of supporting unproductive partners and redundant administrative layers, Martinez Strategic Consulting was extraordinarily efficient and profitable. The final validation came from an unexpected source: a handwritten note from Margaret Chen, my attorney, who'd become a friend during the legal challenges following my departure from Peterson. Rebecca, she wrote, watching you rebuild after such devastating betrayal has been inspiring. You've proven that sometimes destruction is simply preparation for construction of something better. Something better. As I looked around, my office filled with the energy of meaningful work, authentic relationships, and unlimited potential, I realized she was absolutely right. I'd lost a job, but I'd found a calling. I'd been fired from their company, but I'd become the CEO of my own destiny.